Hey everyone, I'm Simon, and I thought for my final video of 2023 I'd do a little travel recap to show you all the trips I took that makes my videos possible. So in this video, I'll take you on a tour of my travels in 2023 as they happened and not as they are published on my channel, while answering some of your questions on the way. One of my most frequently asked questions is how I can afford to travel this much. And, well, I pretty much only travel if I can get a good deal and piece together an itinerary based on that. Let me show you what I mean on my first trip of the year. It started out with a €14 flight to Iași, where I stayed a night in a hostel for €15, continued on to Chisinau in Moldova on a €7 train, which turned into this video. Here I spent the night in Chisinau in a €10 hostel before continuing on my most interesting train journey of the year, the last Soviet night train in Europe down to Bucharest, which cost €48 for a private cabin. I had one night in Bucharest where I spent €15 on a hostel and did a day trip to Brasov to film these two videos that cost €8 and €10 respectively, before flying Wizz Air to Tel Aviv the same evening for €15. I spent 3 nights in Tel Aviv at a hostel for €68, making day trips to Bet Shean and Jerusalem to film these two videos, costing €12 and €14 respectively. From there I continued on a €25 Ryanair flight to Malta, staying one night in a hostel for €20, before flying on to Madrid, giving Ryanair another €20, spending €15 on a hostel, before returning to Copenhagen after one night in Madrid on a €22 flight with Iberia Express. And that's how I managed to visit roughly 5 countries for €338 in accommodation and transportation costs. Next month in February, I followed up with a 5-day trip to Portugal, starting off with flying to Madeira for 2 days, before continuing back to the mainland. On the mainland, I caught a train from Porto down to Lisbon and eventually Faro, which resulted in these 2 videos. And after spending the night in Faro, I flew back to Copenhagen via London. In March, I did a high-speed rail-focused trip, first flying out to Milan and then staying the night, before catching the high-speed train up to Turin and back to Milan, which resulted in these 2 videos. From here, I caught a flight down to Madrid, where the next day I did all 4 major high-speed rail operators in Spain, back to back, which resulted in these 4 videos before I ended up the day in Zaragoza. And here Maria asks a great question, if I will do a travel comparison between the 4 major high-speed rail operators in Spain. And honestly, I don't think so. I don't really have any editorial desire or something to do like a comparison video. But my friend Nonstop YouTube has a great video comparing the 4, so maybe watch that instead. From Zaragoza, I had originally planned to head to San Sebastian via the Cranfrag line and France. But SNCF were on strike as usual, so I had to make other plans. Instead, I opted to get the train via Bilbao, which resulted in the following 2 videos, and then I arrived in San Sebastian. After spending the night there, I caught a flight back to Denmark. In March, I also took a quick trip to Aalborg to film my April Fool's video. In April, I took 2 trips, with the first one heading for Prague via Hamburg and Berlin. I stayed the night in Prague before doing a day trip up to Ostrava, going back to Prague, and then catching the RegioJet sleeper train to Przemysl in Poland. Here I doubled back to Rzeszów and caught a flight to Copenhagen. And the following week, I caught a flight up to Helsinki to do something I've wanted to do ever since I lived in Finland. After a day trip to Tampere to film this video, I headed for Tornio on the VR sleeper, beginning the journey back to Denmark entirely by rail from Finland. Heading via Haparanda, Luleå, Stockholm, Linköping, Kalmar and Alvesta, which resulted in all these videos. And that brings me to some more questions from you guys. Can you travel on my most familiar long-distance route, Helsinki to Kuopio? Well, I can. I'm not sure I will. I've already done the Finnish trains quite extensively on the channel, so unless something new happens or something interesting, I don't think that's gonna be happening on the channel anytime soon. And that brings me to this question from Max, who asks me what is my favorite app of a European railway company. And that has to be the VR app. The UI is so simple and the functionality of it is great. It has live travel updates, you can change your seat after purchasing your ticket, you can easily rebook your ticket, you can easily book a ticket, you can use functions like ordering food to your seat from the restaurant car, and I've just always found it so easy and intuitive to use, so... And then we have this question about what's the best train type in Finland, and, well, hands down, the double-decker sleeper cars, like, that's just one of the best sleeper trains in the world, period, and it's super cheap to travel on it for €49 if you book well in advance. And which trains in Finland I don't like? Well, I generally think Finnish trains, even the old ones, are pretty good quality, but if I have to pick one, it will be the DM12 just because it's like a one-car train. It was super overcrowded when I traveled on it, and they're known for catching on fire. So, what do you think of end gangway trains compared to the Danish IC3 train? Well, is there much of an opinion to have? Like, if the design is reliable and works, it doesn't really matter if it covers the entire front, like on an IC3, or maybe only the central part of the unit, like which is really common on UK trains and some Japanese trains. So, yeah, if the design is reliable and works, I don't really have an opinion on it, to be honest. Continuing on to the month of May, I wanted to take a trip to Germany, but that's when the whole SJ failed to stop at Copenhagen Airport saga happened. And Erik asks, did you ever get a refund for the night train debacle at Kastrup? And yes, I did. After much back and forth with SJ and having to threaten them with legal action, they did finally go ahead and compensate me and the other traveler that night. But seeing as they seem okay with breaking the EU railway legislation pretty publicly, and in general provided abysmal customer service, I doubt I'll ever attempt to use this train again, to be honest. In June, because I was a bit sad that I didn't get to go on the trip in May, I took a little trip to Poland, where I went to Poznan and Gdansk, and I filmed this video. In the end of June, I embarked on one of my biggest trips to this date, starting by catching the DSB Vectron down to Hamburg, and then getting a flight to Tashkent via Belgrade and Abu Dhabi. After spending the night in Tashkent, I continued on to Dushanbe, where the trip began for real. A few days were spent in the Tajik capital before I embarked on the overnight night train to Samarkand, catching the high-speed train up to Tashkent, and eventually a Talgo train to Almaty. From there, I caught a quick 45-minute flight down to Bishkek, the capital of Kyrgyzstan, where I caught the train to Astana. Which brings me to this question. What train was the worst? And well, the Bishkek to Astana train for various reasons, which you'll see next week when that video goes live, so stay tuned. After Astana, I got on a flight to Aktau, where I met up with Superalps and Non-Stop Eurotrip. From here, I embarked on my longest ever rail journey, which took 63 hours to take us to Semi. Next up was the sleeper to Karaganda, followed by a day train to Astana. Astana was the last stop on this well over 3-week-long trip to the Stans. From here, I returned to Denmark, flying via Almaty and Doha to Berlin, where I caught the train to Rostock and eventually the ferry to Falster in Denmark. I filmed a lot of videos in the Stans, some of which you're still yet to see. And that brings me to this question from Michael. What was your favorite trip of the year? Hands down this trip around Central Asia. It was just so much fun, both catching the trains, but also I stayed in a lot of hostels, met a lot of great people. I hitchhiked in Tajikistan and met a lovely Tajik American family who could really explain a lot about the country. And which was my favorite train this year? Well, to be honest, I wasn't really blown away by anything massively this year, and I don't really have anything that sticks out, but I really enjoyed my trip with V on the night train from Luleå to Stockholm in first class with the in-suite shower, and their cabins, they are quite old, but they are really cozy and comfortable. And I also really enjoyed my trip with IRIO on their service from Madrid to Barcelona, so maybe one of those two. What long-distance service has the best value for money? Well, that's a tough one to answer. I think VR's night trains, when you can get them for 49 euros, that's like 12 hours in a comfortable night train, super modern, is really, really good value for money. Bulgaria also has some really, really cheap night trains. And in Kazakhstan, some of the distance you can go for like 20 euros in a night train is actually crazy, so. And after being back in Denmark for roughly a week, it's now August, and I set off on a trip to do some hikes in Zakopane in Poland. I flew out to Krakow and then caught the train down to Zakopane, and then caught the train back up from Zakopane to Krakow, and eventually the Eurocity to Berlin, where I flew back to Copenhagen. In September, I started an internship, which means I wouldn't be able to travel as much, but I did manage to do a day trip to Jutland, where I filmed these 2 videos. And I of course also went to see the Plusbus opening in Aalborg. And that brings me to some Denmark-related questions, such as, will DSB ever not be late? And, well, they're only late 25% of the time. Come on, that's just a little under their goal. Another question, what do you think the best Danish train is? Well, there's not really that much to choose from these days, but I think the IC3. Solid train, it's fairly reliable, the seats are comfortable, and it's very versatile. You can run it like on a regional line with just the 3 cars or coupled together up to 5 units and be like a massive train going to Aarhus. So, yeah, I just really like them, to be honest. What is your opinion about the fact that DSB will no longer operate the Øresundstog? Well, if you mean in terms of operating the actual service from down to Kastrup Airport and across the bridge into Sweden, well, I don't really care who the operator of the train is. If the contract is done well enough, then any operator that qualifies and wins the contract should be good enough to operate the trains, and in general, Skånetrafiken is doing a good job with trains in Skåne. And especially as we've just seen with the punctuality of DSB, I don't necessarily think they're doing the best job at the moment. If you're talking about the actual trains themselves, the last 10 Øresundstog Litra ET being returned to Sweden, well, it's a shame. They're solid trains. They're some of the best electric trains we have in Denmark. And especially I think they were really good on the now intercity service to Odense, the former Pendlerlyn service. But yeah, so it's a bit of a shame to see them go, but it was a bit of an oddball fleet, only having 10 left. Will you ever do a video covering the Litra MR train? Probably not. It's not in passenger service anymore, so that would make it a bit tough, and I don't really have any footage from when they did. But never say never. I guess maybe if something interesting happens with some of the like C-rail safety ones running around here, it could be interesting. And I think there were some in Poland. I'm not sure if they are actually still in service, but that could actually be a pretty cool video. So I won't say never on that one, but probably unlikely. Can you one day travel from Odense to Svendborg? Well, I can. Will I make a video about it? Probably not. It's a regional line run by the Zero, which is quite a common and generic train in my opinion. So, but if I have a desire or need to go to Svendborg at some point, then I probably will catch the train. So, the rest of the year I didn't really travel that much because I've been busy doing this internship. So, but I did manage to do a little weekend trip to Finland, mostly to go to a concert, where I caught some VR trains up to Oulu and back down to Helsinki. And between the switch of November and December, I went on a little extended weekend trip to Germany, where I filmed some videos you'll be seeing over the next month-ish. And I also ended up in the Czech Republic on that trip with the Railjet video, which you've already seen. Tobias asks, which European railway operator do you find the most promising based on current services and future plans? I think what Regiojet has done and is doing in the Czech Republic is really exciting, offering many direct trains at cheap prices, really targeting the leisure market well. And they seem to be quite innovative, willing to enter partnerships like they've done with the Ukrainian railways with regards to the Proximisselsliebe with through ticketing. So I think we'll see them launch even more trains across Europe, and I could see them becoming a really solid player in like the leisure market, offering cheap tickets at in comfortable trains, but not necessarily at high speeds. In the high-speed market, I really think what Trenitalia are doing with the Frecciarossa trains and bringing them across Europe is really exciting. IRIO seems to be doing quite well in Spain, and especially their plans to make a similar operator or something around the Amsterdam, Brussels, Paris, Berlin corridor is really exciting. SNCF Thales Eurostar to me seems to be like one of the operators in Europe with the worst attitude and run in the most predatory way, which is just bad for passengers and competition in general. So what IRIO has done in Spain and is doing in Spain, I really think would be exciting to have on this corridor, and it's desperately needed because SNCF Thales Eurostar really need some competition in my opinion, because they're just terrible. And now for some questions about the Baltics. Will you revisit Estonia after the arrival of the new Skoda trains? When will you make a trip report on Lithuanian Railways LTG link? I'd like to go back to the Baltics, and now with the launch of the direct Lithuania-Latvia train, that's really easy and really exciting. I'd like to do that one. And so I think that might be on the cards maybe for late 2024, but I'm not making any promises. I don't have any concrete plans to go there at the moment. Will I ever do some business class flight reviews? Probably not. I doubt you'll ever see another flight review on this channel, to be honest, unless I find something like really interesting or unique that's sort of public transport related that might pique my interest. But other than that, no, I doubt it. In general, I think flying sucks, and I want to spend the least amount of money on it. And I generally only travel with a backpack anyway. I actually prefer to travel that way. So Wizz and Ryanair does a great job of getting me around places for like 20 euros on a direct flight, which is the shortest and quickest and cheapest way to fly. So. What is your opinion on car culture dependency, and what do you think we should do to make train travel more popular, etc.? Well, that's a highly complex question, and it's something I have a lot of own opinions on, to be frank. It's way too short for me to dive into in this Q&A. I'm currently studying a bachelor's in mobility, transportation, and logistics, so it's something that comes up in my studies quite a lot. The answer is going to depend a lot on if we're talking urban travel in cities, long-distance services, rural areas, but to the train part of your question. In general, I think trains should be frequent, fast, and reliable, and well integrated into other transportation options. So to like form a network where you can actually get somewhat the freedom of owning a car when you need to go around, and you can make trips at any point of the day, etc. I think countries like Switzerland and the Netherlands do this quite well, and to a certain extent Denmark. But I'm always like baffled when I look at timetables for railways in like France and Spain, where they run trains once, twice, 3 times a day. It doesn't connect to anything at a major station, and it just doesn't really seem well integrated. And that extends to their high-speed networks as well. When it comes to car culture and dependency, in general, I think car dependency is bad. You should be able to live a life without a car, and many people can't even drive a car or own a car, either involuntarily or legally, or because they simply choose not to want to learn how to drive. And you should be able to do that. We need a robust public transport network, or at least to support alternatives to ensure social mobility in society, so nobody gets left behind. So I don't think we're realistically ever going to be able to serve every trip like conveniently without a car. There will always be trips that can be made with a car way more effectively, but we should ensure that everybody at least have an alternative to get to their grocery shopping, to the hospital, to school, and can build a life for themselves without needing to need a car wherever they live. Pedro asks, the trip for next year that excites you the most? Well, your Interrail trip sounds very exciting. I generally only really plan my trips like maybe a month or two in advance, so I actually don't have that much planned at the moment. Next month, I'm heading to the Southern Hemisphere for the first time, so that's the most exciting thing I got planned. And then I'm going to a music festival in the Czech Republic in July, and I don't really think there'll be any train-related things in regards to that. But I look forward to some really interesting countries coming to the channel in the new year. Will you make some trips in France someday? I gotta be honest, probably not. France is not one of the countries I really enjoy traveling to. I've been 4 times and I tried a 5th where a strike ruined it, and in general I think the French rail network is not super interesting. I don't really like the way SNCF runs their railway, and it's just another country that I'm super fond of, so there are many other places I'd rather go before I go back to France again. Adam asked, can you please do some UK trains? Well, I can definitely go and do them, but the UK seems quite well covered here on YouTube, so it's not something that is super high on my priority list, but I'd definitely like to go back. So the Caledonian Sleeper really seems interesting, but it's also super expensive. So I might do a trip there this year. The flights are fairly cheap from Denmark, and you can quite easily get there. When will you come to Slovenia? Well, that's a good question. Probably this year, actually. I really want to go back and hike there again, and then I didn't really do much railway related when I was there last time. So I would say there's a decent chance it will happen here in 2024. Super Alps asks, do you love me? Of course I like you, Alps. We known each other for what? Talked on and off for maybe like 9 years or something like that. And you put out some great railway videos and have great railway gen, which is excellent when you need to plan a trip around trains. So I hope we continue to talk for many years to come. And that was all the questions you had. I hope you've enjoyed this look into my travels, and I guess by extension me, and I hope to make this video a yearly thing. And with that, I would just like to wish everyone a happy new year, and I'll see you back on the first Sunday of 2024.